everyone. My name's Tanya Fraser and welcome to the second episode of my new podcast, Prism Inside the Creative Mind. I'm joined today again by my co-host Laura Coots, and today our special guest star is Jason Barry Smith from the world of opera.
Well, yes.
Welcome, Jason.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Thank you very much. Great to see you.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see you. It's actually quite funny. This has been a great opportunity for me to get back in touch with a lot of people I knew a long, long time ago.
Yes, well, when we first met, we were both studying at the conservatorium.
That's right. I was
a couple of years ago.
Yeah, a few years ago, I did a bit of first year at the con before I went to the Guildhall.
That's right.
And we were in the same class.
We were, and it was quite a powerhouse class, actually.
Yes.
Really.
Oh my God, yes.
It really was. So we were really lucky to be there at a great time.
Exactly.
The conservatoriums, it's a wonderful time in here in Brisbane.
Yeah, no, so it's been, you were a superstar back then. You had you were just like this caramel voice.
Oh,
we were just like, wow, and so you've had a really interesting journey, taking your own path a lot of the time.
That's the thing. I think that one of the great things that sort of happened when I went through the conservatorium was that at the same time, even before I went to the conservatorium, I had a life outside classical music, and that was very much in the pop genre. And then and that's what I sort of did for quite a long time. Oh, yeah, lots of people don't know. It's like Rosario LaSpina, the same thing. And we went to high school together, Ros and I.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of pop music in my sort of early years, from the age of 9 to 13, 14. And I joined the Queensland Youth Choir, which of course was a show choir.
Yes.
So most of their repertoire was not classical as well.
Yeah.
And then I was part of a cabaret group that sort of grew out of that. Robert Clark, who ran the youth choir, created this cabaret group called Vocal Point. And all of this stuff was happening at the same time while I was studying at the conservatorium. And I mean, as my wife says, the 1980s for me, my teenage years were my sort of misspent youth in many ways, because I've got focused very much on classical music in my study.
Yes.
And so I don't know much about about pop music from the 80s, but I know plenty about it from previous.
I see, yeah.
There's not much to be missed out on.
Well, you know what? I've been taught since. We've been now together for 3 decades, and I've learned a lot about the 80s music, which is great. And so what that allowed me to do, I guess, was to have a career which broached both.
Yes.
And I guess when I first came out of the conservatorium, my voice really was most suited to music theatre, because it's lucky when you're a baritone.
Yeah.
Because your voice doesn't have to change terribly much going into music theatre repertoire at all. You can virtually just sort of change there, and if you're good at dialogue and you can move, you're lucky.
Yeah.
So I spent about 5 years doing music theatre around New Zealand and Australia. I did Les Mis over in New Zealand, which was great. And then I did those very, very fun Gilbert and Sullivan productions with John English and Simon Gallagher that just went gangbusters.
And that'd be quite difficult to sing, wouldn't it? Because it's all tongue twisters and very fast.
They tend to be, and I would tend to be the understudy for the padder guy as well. So I'd be the guy who would understudy. I ended up playing the Major General at the end of the seasons. And it is very fast a lot of the time, but also it's quite sustained singing while you're doing choreography, which at sometimes wasn't what Gilbert and Sullivan were expecting, but thank God they did it, because it was such fun. And we all learned so much. Again, that was an amazingly a cast full of stars. Even the ensemble was full of. I mean, Anthony Way, who's now this extraordinary actor who has worked everywhere in the world, was the understudy to the Pirate King.
Oh wow!
Amazing. Michael Falzon, who sadly left us last year, became one of Australia's biggest music theatre stars. So I mean, really amazing.
It's such a. It's interesting because, I mean, I'm a musician. I did music degrees. You guys also both did a music degree. But what you do in that is so different to what we do. Like, we sit in our room and we practice. We have orchestra, we have chamber music, we have to do theory classes. But you guys, it's actually really different. You spend more time learning languages, going and having acting lessons and dance.
Yeah. All of the above.
And we're not doing any of that. I mean, at the Guildhall, I thought I want to learn German because I was working in Germany a lot, and so I convinced them to let me go into the singers' German class. But yeah, I wasn't very good at that. But
the singer's German class is very different to the sort of German that you would be required to use in a rehearsal.
Yeah.
To be quite honest, or just in general life in Germany as well.
Yeah. I learned numbers. So I've worked in so many countries in the world where I don't speak their language, but what I learned was numbers, so I could always tell where to go from. Yeah. And I also learned in German, it's like, one more time.
Go back,
back to the start. And I just knew the numbers in that, and I was set.
And you pretty much are.
Yeah.
And I have to say, whenever I've lived in an overseas country for a while, and I'm getting to know the language, I watch television shows that have a formula, usually a game show. Game shows are fantastic for learning the language because there's a formula that they use every time. Quite regularly, they talk about numbers. And so you get really good at the numbers as well. And if it's like when my wife and I were in Italy, I was lucky enough to win the Italian Opera Prize. And so I was like a young artist at the Rome Opera. And we used to come home and watch Chi vuole essere milionario, which is Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
And it sounds so sexy.
No, it sounds in Italian, doesn't it? It's not. But it was, and it was so helpful. Yeah. So helpful. But you're right, it is a very different thing. Being a singer is, and I'm not saying that being a musician is not, but it's a full body experience all of the time. And it is your body which is your instrument. And you are telling the story through everything that you do.
It's funny you say that because I was talking to Karen Sharp about acting classes and talking about how beneficial it was to her to have done acting classes. Yeah. I myself, and Laura too, did ballet really seriously right up to very advanced level. And I've often found if I've had a student who was a dancer, they seem to have some extra special natural talents, I find, being a musician. But I really wish that we, at the instrumentalists, would have also got that opportunity, because a lot of the time you just get it's all very introverted. You're in your little room. You're feeling depressed because you don't feel you're doing enough. Yeah. It's not, and in actual fact, getting out there and having a dance class, a language class, an acting class, and an interpretation, you do a lot more like interpreting the text is a big thing for you guys.
Hugely.
And something we only think of it as an afterthought. Like if we're playing a piece and happen to be related to a poem, we will probably go and have a look at that poem. But for you guys, that's a starting point.
It always is. It always is, and that's something that I work with students with all of the time. Firstly, who is the character? Whether it be a poem or a character from an opera or a piece of music theatre or something like that, who is the person who's talking? Yeah. Who are they talking to? And why? Those three very simple questions answer a lot of important things.
We should do the same. If we're playing a sonata, we should be asking those same questions. We do in a way, like, what is the composer saying? Yeah. But again, we're just sort of winging it a little bit. We haven't sat down and really thought about it necessarily.
It's really interesting when you have to work with text. And you have to work with words. It is fascinating to see the way that the composer actually uses compositional devices to enhance what it is that the text is actually saying. Particularly I love talking about the way that a composer has written a subtext in the accompaniment. Because subtext is a big deal in acting. Yes. We don't always say what we feel.
That's right.
In fact, most of the time we don't. And so when a character is saying something, it is not necessarily what they really mean deep down inside. It quite regularly is something to placate the person that they're speaking to or whatever. But regularly the composer writes in the accompaniment what actually really is happening. When you have a good composer writing an accompaniment, it's fascinating. So it is really interesting to watch those things happen, and also and just using harmonic devices. The way suspensions can be just such a plangent thing because when you're using a suspension, it really gives pain to the thing. If like When I Am Laid in Earth from Dido's Lament,
gorgeous.
The way that Purcell uses that, well, firstly the ground bass, which it's based all upon, this downward chromatic bit of music, which he reharmonises so many ways and doesn't harmonise for the same number of bars that it actually is equal to.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary. But then uses the text so beautifully in the way that he sets it, so that there's pain in it, in words when
pain
it's required.
And beauty.
Yes, yeah, which is he. And Robert Schumann, I think, is a person later on who are both amazing at being able to do that.
You know, isn't it funny that I remember having to sit through harmony or history, and you had to memorise what the composer. It was just, I found it just a real drag, basically, sitting through those lessons, where they're trying to get you to understand that stuff. But now, like you, now that I'm grown up, and I'm actually more interested in the music, not passing the exam that I know I'm going to have, I'm fascinated by all these composition styles, and I actually feel like I want to go back and learn composition, because I want to study all of that stuff I was bored and didn't pay attention to when I was young.
Well, it's the stuff that I read so much about now.
Yeah.
And it's the stuff that fascinates me more, because I guess, and I say this to my children, I have teenage boys, and but the thing is, you have to say to a person, I'm saying this not because I am better than you are.
Yeah.
It's because I have perspective, because, I'm now over 50, I've lived on this planet for a lot longer than you have.
Yeah.
And that's what I think one of the great gifts of us getting older is that we can start putting stuff together.
Yeah.
And that's what starts happening, isn't it?
And I feel frustrated at the moment. I'm thinking, wish I knew that when I was younger.
Oh, and many times that I've said that to myself as well. And it would have given much, but the thing is, I don't think there's an expectation that young person could understand.
Yeah, I suppose you just can't rush it. It's like, it has to marinate.
It does.
It takes a few years.
It does, and sometimes I go, when I have those realisations, and you go, wow, it took you that long to realise that, Jodie?
Yeah. Oh my God. But look, listen, there's lots. You're doing so many exciting things. But before we get on to that, last year, as Laura said, what did you just say? I started with Southern Cross and then COVID.
and then, so do we count that as a year, or is it?
I know.
Starting again now.
I felt a nice restart.
I felt particularly bad of everybody in the arts. I felt really bad for opera singers, because opera singers, their entire livelihood is based on live performance, being in a place for 3 months, travelling to the next place for 3 months, and they've got no backup. And so half the time they barely have a place that they live,
Pretty much,
And that is such an all-consuming life. Most opera singers don't have much time to teach. They certainly don't have secure university positions. I know you weren't quite in that boat, but tell us a bit about what your perspective of what happened and how you guys managed.
Well, we were really lucky. We were, my wife and I, my wife is an author, and so she was able to keep writing, which is great. I mean, she found it a very challenging time in which to write, but she was able to keep writing. And I made a decision a long time ago, because I had such a sort of wide base of skills, I guess, that I wasn't going to put all of my eggs into the basket of just being a performer. That I was going to have lots of things that I did, and that's kept me really excited about what it is that I do over a very long period of time. So, which is great. So for me, it meant that 5 really big contracts just went like that, including an international recording and all of these sorts of things. But we can't look back. You look back and go, what would that have been like if we had done it? But it didn't really. Ultimately, they went. I was able to stay here, teach online, spend a lot of time with my beautiful family.
Yes.
And thank God we live where we live here in Brisbane, because things then started to open up. The opera company was great in supporting artists during that time through an aria a day, which was great. And I mean, everyone who did that got paid. I mean, as they said, it wasn't a huge fee, but it was keeping you doing something, and also keeping our community alive as well, understanding, okay, well, you're there at the moment and look at what you're doing. Isn't that fantastic?
And I've found that to be a wonderful anthology of all the singers around the place. So at the moment, I've been sort of researching singers online a bit at the moment, and do you know where I keep going to listen to them sing?
Yeah.
Opera Day by Opera Queensland,
Yeah.
and I'm like, okay, that gives me I get an idea of what they're like with that.
And what is it, 100 and something? I've forgotten how
No,
many
but
singers it ended up being.
It's not just Brisbane, Queensland.
At all.
It's national.
National,
international. Is it international
yeah.
even? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think Opera Australia were sort of helping with that, like a bit just in promoting it.
Yeah, absolutely, they were, and they were doing other things. Lyndon Terracini was doing some lovely online interviews with people as well, which was great. And there have been some amazing things coming from arts institutions around the world. I mean, there really, really have been some fantastic things. Yeah. Also, Opera Queensland was great in being able to, there's a wonderful community. I do a lot of community-based work with Opera Queensland, with education and just getting people singing.
That's
really,
right,
you know, getting people realising that engaging with their voice is something that's really kind of special.
Well, that I find interesting. I'd love to talk to the both of you about that. But when did you start back the community things? What month?
Gosh, well, physically we were able to do something last November. But all of the rest of the stuff during lockdown time was online. And so I was doing stuff sitting at my piano here with a computer in front of me, taking people around the world.
Doing Zoom with a trillion faces on
Pretty much.
Isn't it amazing?
It's extraordinary.
We all embrace technology. Like, I think, I don't know, was it in the too hard basket for you before COVID?
I don't know whether it was ever too hard. I just didn't bother because I didn't kind of need to.
No, that's right.
And
I mean, though we could, everyone wanted us to be cutting edge, and now it seems there's nothing cutting edge about doing a Zoom thing with everyone does it, you know.
Yeah, everyone does, and there are ways of being able to deal with what I call the... When I'm teaching, I still have the delay is always an interesting experience. And particularly as a singing teacher, you quite regularly are playing for the student who is singing at the other end. And so it's a double delay. So the piano goes to them, then they hear it, and then I get back sort of this double delay. My wife and my younger boy, who plays piano as well, stood at the top of the stairs at the end of one of my lessons one day, and I just came and they said, "How did you do that?"
Yeah.
And I said, "What?" Because you kept playing while that person was so out of time with you. And you get used to it. But actually, one of the fantastic... it helps my musicianship a lot, but you can actually hear them doing things because you're not playing... If you know what I mean, the main beat that you're playing on is not aligned with what it is that they're doing. So you can hear if they're not preparing properly.
Yes.
That's fascinating. And then also because generally the mics are pretty crappy.
Yeah.
You can actually hear if they're focused throughout their range. Like if there's a bit of their range that is not as, focused, just open and brilliant. You can hear that really well on a crappy microphone, which in the beautiful resonance of a music room sometimes you miss.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
It's sort of that ambience, whereas it's just like dry as dry. It's fascinating.
It's funny, actually. I have in my house, I had a beautiful music room built when we built our house. It's got lovely wooden floors, high ceilings. It's got a lovely sound. Yeah. I've given it up. My daughter has it as a bedroom, and I've taken her bedroom with the low roof and the carpet to practice in, because I found when I was in my nice room, I thought all my reads were fantastic, and then I'd get to rehearsal and it was like, oh, it's not good. So I prefer to be in the horrible acoustic. So I know.
I do that too.
Yeah,
but then I treat myself and I go in the bathroom like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely right. This room actually, even though it doesn't have a high ceiling, because it's got that strange room that goes around, it sort of has a bit of a resonance about it, but it's not too. And which is great, particularly for the people who I'm working with. I mean, for everyone, but particularly people who I'm working with who are doing music theatre and pop stuff, because they're going to be on mic a lot of the time as well. You've just got to be able to hear everything that they're doing.
Absolutely.
Because as soon as you put a mic on a person, it just amplifies what it is, the sound that they're doing. It doesn't make it any better, it doesn't make it any worse, it just amplifies it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, with the community stuff, I know with Opera Queensland, you did the most incredibly fascinating thing, maybe it was just a couple of years ago, where you took an opera production around regional Queensland, but you trained up the locals to be the chorus.
It's an amazing project. It's called Project, whatever the composer's name was. So the first one was Project Puccini, the next one was Project Rossini, and then Project Gilbert and Sullivan.
So how did that... what was that? That must have been challenging for you to go and train people who knew nothing about musical singing.
It was, but basically, Lindy Hume had a vision that, and she continues this with all of the festival work that she does at wherever she works, because she worked at the Sydney Festival for a while before she came to Opera Queensland, and she's down in Tasmania. which I've forgotten the name of the festival, but it's
10
fabulous.
Days on the Island.
That's the one.
Yeah.
10 Days on the Island. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But she always makes sure that community is ensconced in what is happening within the arts.
Yeah.
And so she said, I want to create, and help enhance the artistic vibrancy of each of the centres that we go to by skills building in those places. So let's create a community chorus in each of these places that we go to. So then it was left to Mark Taylor and I to work out how that best was going to happen. So what we realised was we need 2 people who are on the ground in each of those places who were members of the community. One who was going to be someone who could teach them the notes and the language, and the other person who was going to be more like a stage manager who could help with movement. Stage manager / assistant director sort of thing. And so those people, and then sometimes they had an administrator as well, but usually that second person could be the administrator. And so basically we got together all of the things that were required for those people to learn that stuff.
Yes.
For the first 2 it was pretty hard, because what we did was we rehearsed, did the Brisbane season, and then went straight on tour.
Yeah.
And they were the 2 that I directed. And it was just like, holy shit. Because you couldn't get together all of the information quickly enough.
Yes.
But in the next one, what they did was with Ruddy Gore, they did the Brisbane season one year and then did the tour the next year, and which was great. But it was extraordinary. Yeah. All of these people came and auditioned for us. There was so much talent in each of those places. And a place... So
you auditioned it. I didn't realise it was an audition. So, I mean, so my question is, I mean, this is the funny thing about singing. We can all sing. Yeah. To some degree, but we actually don't know how to sing. Yeah. I have never had a singing lesson in my life.
But there are singers who would get money for paid to them who have never had singing.
Yeah, but did you actually teach them singing from an operatic point of view?
There are certain things that were helped with, absolutely. But I mean, there were lots of people within these communities who already had that. Who knew how to do that sort of stuff, which was great. They may have more of a music theatre background, because that's really mostly what those people are doing in those communities, is pieces of music theatre, but that didn't really matter at all. But we'd help them, and, just the language classes themselves. I mean, language is such a big part of the way that you sing.
Yeah.
And how you communicate through that language is a big thing. So if you're singing in Italian, it actually sort of makes you make a different type of a noise.
Yeah. But also, most of us would sing in the pop stuff. You sing in our normal voice.
Yeah.
I
like that phrase.
Yeah, but the opera voice is the way... I know nothing about singing,
please.
It's the way that is means you can project to a big hall with no amplification.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the reasoning behind the technique of opera. Is that am I correct?
Absolutely,
Otherwise, we'd all sing with microphones quite
Well, that's exactly right. But the thing is, the way that the expectation of being an opera singer now is far beyond what the expectation of being an opera singer 300 years ago was. The size of theatres now is so much vaster. But having put that aside, really singing is just about engaging with your body. And with what one of my students so beautifully put a few years ago, decrapifying. So really, it's about engaging with your body and making the sound that your body makes, that it would make in a situation where you couldn't use words. And my sister has an intellectual disability. Okay, she speaks beautifully, but she has always had people around her who are non-verbal.
Yeah.
So a person who is non-verbal will make extraordinary sounds, loud noises, because they're engaging with their body all of the time when they're communicating.
Yes.
Actually, sometimes, and particularly with the English language and any sort of Nordic languages, German and all of those sorts of Nordic languages, they actually stop that easy emission of that engaged sound because everything seems to be so chopped up.
Yeah.
Whereas when you speak with an Italian accent, everything just keeps going out this way all of the time.
Yeah.
So really, trying to get a person to sing in an operatic way is to get them to really get into their body.
Yeah.
And I think that that's true of anything at the highest level. Playing an instrument, being a sports person,
well, that's
being an actor. It's about being as much part of what that experience is as
Yeah.
possible.
Well, I mean, simplifying as well. So,
Yes,
which is what your student.
declassification.
Yeah. 'Cause you've got to learn which muscles need to be used
Yep.
and try to get rid of any other tension that is not needed.
Yeah.
But we tend to, and this is why I wish I knew when I was 19 what I know now.
Mm.
We tend to try. I always tried too hard,
Yeah, God, didn't we all?
and so yeah,
But then there's a point at which your body doesn't allow you to do that
Yeah.
anymore.
yeah,
As muscles become less elastic,
yes,
which happens, when from, I guess, our mid-30s on, muscles become less elastic and you find that you just can't sustain the same sort of muscular pressure that you did previously. So you actually have to refine
yes,
and work, okay, what the hell do I really need to do?
exactly, yeah,
And every singer goes through a couple of moments of vocal crisis, we call them, but times where their body is not able to sustain what they've been doing previously and they have to do a rethink.
yeah, yeah,
And it is such an important part of the process of being a singer. And yet it's one of those things that people try to hide away.
Yeah.
Because they think, oh, well, people won't employ me because they think that I've had a big problem.
yeah,
No, it's normal for
Yes.
people, and I wish we would talk about it. It's like mental health.
exactly.
If only we would discuss it more.
Yeah. But I was just going back to mental health and singing as well. When you have some emotional trauma that you're going through, it doesn't just, it affects your body like you would, get a cold if you're feeling run down or something like that. Speaking from experience, if I've been in a place of deep mental illness, my whole body is affected, and then in turn my voice is affected, and I can't work, I just can't sing like I used to, and you have to retrain and go, let's try and use this in a different way. Let's try and put a spin on this and make it a positive thing.
Absolutely.
And that's, I suppose, why I know my daughter was asking me yesterday, what is the hardest instrument? And
It's a great question.
and I was sort of giving her that everyone says the oboe and the horn, and she goes, but isn't piano? And I'm like, well, you can make a sound on the piano easily, but then therefore they make it harder, the notes. Whereas it's hard to make a sound on the oboe or the French horn, so we don't have to play as difficult notes. But then you look at singing where you don't have any instrument. You've got what you've got. You know, what do you get? What you what's the saying? You get what you get, and you don't get upset.
Oh,
That's
I like that.
Yeah.
You get what you get. Because actually, to be quite honest, that's what I've done with my career. I got what I got, and I didn't get upset about it. No. I just made the most of it, because I knew that I wasn't going to be
Pavarotti.
Yeah, exactly. Whomever that person is.
Yeah.
I knew I wasn't going to be him, but I was going to make the best out of what I had.
Yes.
And I think that's and I remember when I won a big competition, and I was interviewed after it, and they said, oh, so what do you want to do? And I said, I just want to be the best singer that I can be. Yeah. And I realised that when I was 22.
That's a pretty good realisation.
Well, I was amazed listening back to this interview, and I just sort of went, that was actually really, really a great understanding. Because a lot of people do, at the beginning of their career, have aspirations, and I'm not saying that I didn't have aspirations to do things that were fabulous, but I wanted to be realistic within those aspirations.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're right. I think the voice it's a complicated instrument. I teach lots of people at various levels and I teach singing to people for various reasons. I work with lots of people who want to become a professional. I work with lots of people who are professionals who just need a little bit of help, or what I call a grease and an oil change. There's a moment in their career where they're just going, "What's happening? Why am I getting all tired? Oh, it's just that. Oh, fine, okay, nice." And then I work with people who learn to sing because that's actually going to enhance their life.
Yeah.
And I'm actually starting to do a lot more working with people in companies, talking to them about the way that they connect with their voice and they connect with each other, because there are so many lessons that we have as musicians from the rehearsal room that people don't have that insight in the real world.
Yeah.
I have, and I'm sure that I won't mention his name, but I have a wonderful guy who has been learning from me for a couple of years, and he walked in, and he is a business leader. He walked in and he had his first lesson with me, and about 15 minutes into it I said, I think that you're a good listener. And he went, oh, I don't know, I've never really thought about it. I said, okay, well, we've been doing some exercises, and you don't even listen to the end of the exercise before you try to sing it back. And when I'm speaking to you, I can see that you're actually trying to formulate what it is that you're trying to say next before you've actually listened to the end of the sentence. So, could we work on that? Because music's all about call and response.
Yeah.
Always.
Yes.
Does it? And it can become extremely complicated within that ideal. But it's really about an idea and a response to that idea.
Yes.
And then a response to that response.
Well, it's a conversation.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And I am amazed at how many people formulate their responses before they've heard all of the information.
Yeah, yeah.
It's such a fascinating thing to observe. And so he's actually getting me to talk to his team
Yes.
about what this can mean for them as well, which is really, it's kind of extraordinary to us, because it seems so obvious to us that that's what's happening. But I don't think many other people have that experience.
No. Well, I had a similar experience in when I was first in a professional orchestra back when I was, in my early 20s, when I was playing a big solo, but I realised it wasn't quite together with the lead cello, who had a sort of some type of very important counter melody or accompaniment. I can't remember, but I think I was working with Rostropovich at the time, and he was always talking about having this out, your ear. You had to have an ear that was over there, 100 metres away, the ear. And what he was trying to get me to do was listen to the cello accompaniment instead of my solo. And as a solo voice, the oboe solo voice and your solo voice, stopping worrying about yourself when you're a bit nervous because everyone's listening and you've got a big solo, that is one of the hardest things to do, is to stop thinking about yourself and listen, have that ear out there, as Rostropovich used to say. So.
And I mean, Pavarotti used to talk. There was a wonderful interview with him when the Met first started doing live streaming, I guess, way back in the 70s, so their thing wasn't streaming, live television events. Whoever was hosting it went up to Pavarotti after the first act and he said, "You're singing so beautifully, Mr. Pavarotti." And he said, "Oh, thank you." And he said, "Surely you can tell." He said, "I cannot tell." He said, but if my ears were in the second balcony, I could tell. If they were on the side of my head.
That's so true.
But it's so true, and that's something that is such an important thing. But the way that you describe that idea of listening to somebody else before listening to yourself.
Yes, it's tricky. It's scary.
But it's empathy.
Yeah. Well, you can't play together until you stop. But it's also about not being so obsessed with what you're doing.
That's true.
Some of my greatest performances that people have fed back to me that was the best show, and I'm like, I can't remember a thing. Because I was so in the moment, so listening to everyone else, that I have no idea what I did. It was like, when you're driving home, you're like, how did I get from A to B?
Yeah.
And you go, how did I do that entire show? I have no recollection, but it was great.
Absolutely. And it's so true. It's soon, the more, because as soon, just in general life, if you're obsessed with what it is that you're thinking about in your head, as soon as those voices start up, and we all have those voices, don't we? We all have those voices, and they're important to have. But it's important to be able to just say, I don't really need to acknowledge. I acknowledge you, but I don't really need to listen to you at this point in time. But when we get obsessed with that voice inside our head, it's the same as that thing of worrying about what it is that we sound like.
Yeah.
We can't know what we sound like.
True,
I mean, we can never know what we sound like. We can know what the feeling is when other people have said, that sounds great. I better remember what that feeling is that I got at that point in time. And I think it's even more ephemeral for we singers, that sensation, because we're hearing all of the stuff. I think they say something like close to 90% of what we hear is through bone.
Oh, really? Wow.
And only about 10% or 15% actually comes through the air, which is what everyone else is hearing.
Actually, I judge it if my muscles are working in the way, because for me, it's a mini sport, little tiny sport with the mouth and the diaphragm. Yeah. But that's pretty much all it is, and I can tell if it feels right there. I know that it's sounding right. Yeah. That's what one practices.
And that it's true. It's true. But in those moments where we become less aware of that self is when we start to listen to the other people. And the way you described it was just the pure empathy, being able to listen to what another person is saying, feeling what that is, while still being yourself.
Yeah, And
I mean, surely
doing what
that
the
is...
composer, expressing what their composer wrote, I suppose.
Well, yeah, and
yeah.
what they give, oh my gosh, what a gift that is.
Yeah.
That we get to read what these great people have written down.
Yeah.
Centuries ago, and we get to deal with this every day.
It's
seemed what a
yeah,
gift.
no, it is.
What a
Yeah.
gift.
That's why we do it.
Yeah, it is.
Well, look, we're probably getting near the end of our show today, but tell me what you've got on the horizon. You're going to Perth very soon.
I am in only a couple of weeks' time. I'm going over to Perth to redirect Lindy Hume's version of The Barber of Seville, which is a fantastic version of The Barber of Seville that was done in Brisbane, 5 years ago, I think it was originally, and I was her assistant on that, and then it's gone internationally since then, and it's come back, and it was to happen in South Australia. That was one of the contracts I missed out on last year. I was to redirect it for South Australia, so Lindy's going to do South Australia this year, and I'll do Perth. And so that's great.
And there's no quarantine?
No, we don't have to worry about anything at this point in time.
This point in
but
time.
That's the operative stuff, because I've got stuff when I come back.
That's the worry going forward now.
Yeah.
Like I'm booking people for our festival in Bangalore, but I'm just, I was just thinking that just yesterday I'm thinking, well, it's in New South Wales, we're in Queensland, we went down last week, no problems crossing borders, but what happens if something happened
and it can
on the festival? Well, shouldn't it?
Wait, but the thing is,
we've got plan Bs.
And that's the thing. And that's the thing. You know, we all have to have a plan B in these situations. But people are very understanding of it.
Yes, that's right.
One of my dear friends, Stuart Kelly, who runs a really lovely sort of boutique piano festival down in just outside Melbourne. And
I've
forgotten what it's called. And one of my students was going down to Melbourne to go and be not be part of it, but actually be one of the audience members. It had to be cancelled the night before because Melbourne went back into lockdown. And, you know, it was extraordinary how much support Stuart received from the people who were to be going. You know, my student particularly, and I think there were other people as well, didn't expect any sort of refund on what it was, which was lovely to be able to support him. So I think that there are lots of people who are they get it. And they get that the arts has been doing it hard. And I mean, we are so lucky by comparison to our dear colleagues overseas.
Oh
my gosh, it's just...
I don't know how
they just keep themselves.
No. So after Perth, what else have you got?
Then I come back here, and Opera Queensland's doing a lot of work in regional Queensland during April, May, and I'll be associated with a lot of the community music making with younger people and older people on that, and then be part of the... what's it called? FFOO is what it's called. Outback Opera. Festival of Outback Opera.
Oh.
The Festival of Outback Opera, which will be happening in Longreach and Winton.
Oh, wow.
Which is really exciting.
Yeah.
So that's going out there, and
And also doing your Sing, Sing, Sing you were telling us about.
Yeah, absolutely. Sing, Sing, Sing now happens the final Wednesday of every month at the Emporium Hotel at Outback.
Wow,
which is great.
Amazing.
It's such fun.
So tell us about that. That's for anybody.
Anyone who wants to come and sing classical repertoire. And I mean, there are opera choruses, there's a little bit of operetta. I always get a bit of Gilbert and Sullivan in there now and again. But also a bit of folk music sometimes. But it's basically core operatic repertoire that they're going to learn. We always do one piece in a foreign language. We'll do the rest of the repertoire in English translation. And you just go there, have a great time in the bar at the
In the bar? Do you get a drink with that? You get a free drink? Or you're not meant to drink and sing?
You can totally drink and sing. I don't know whether you have to pay for the drinks or whether you get a free... Oh, you might get... I don't know. I'm not going to say anything.
That sounds
great. It's fun. And, people love it. And give it a go. Bring some friends who've never experienced it.
I can't sing, but maybe I should give it a go. So the last Wednesday of every month
at the Emporium, 6 p.m. stuff.
And you take it or...
I take it usually, but when I'm in Perth, the lovely Katie Stenzel will be taking it. And then, later on in the year, where I'm doing I'm studying a role for Opera Queensland in The Marriage of Figaro, and then later on in the year doing some work at some festivals with a dear colleague of mine called Luke Volker, who's a fantastic pianist. He and I did a recital for Opera Queensland last year, which was delayed, but we got to do it at the end of August, which was great. And he is just fab young man who plays the piano beautifully and has we have a great rapport. I met up, I think, when he was about 16, so I mean about 20 years ago, and he's just great, and I've sort of watched him grow into a wonderful artist, and it's
Yeah.
lovely to work with him now
Excellent.
as a colleague too.
Yes.
So yeah, and a lot of teaching, and there'll be a lot of stuff happening. But I as I say, I've been really lucky in this transitional period out of COVID.
Yes.
And also even during COVID, it's been a great time, and I have to say that even though we have not been together, colleagues and myself have felt very connected
Yes.
during this time. I
Yeah.
think we've all been in the same sort of boat, and thank goodness for the internet and being able to call people with great ease, and social media, as tricky as it can be at times.
I think the silver lining is that we've embraced it, and we're actually in more communication. Same with Southern Cross. I mean, we're in more communication because we now do Zoom calls. So with our members being all around Australia, we've been able to keep in very close contact.
It is, and it's so easy to do.
Yeah.
It's so easy to, and also internationally. And the other thing is, with teaching now, I've got a dear ex-student who now lives in the States, and she's going to be having some lessons coming up as well. This is so crazy.
It's actually, just put us on a different pathway.
Yeah.
It's quite exciting.
It is. It's really thrilling.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely.
Well, look, thank you so much, Jason. It's
Such a
been so
pleasure.
much fun to catch up again.
Absolutely, for me as well. Thanks for coming to my place.
Oh, no, it's beautiful. Beautiful house. And thanks so much, Laura.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
You too.
Yeah, so we might catch up with you later in the year and
I'd love
find out
to.
how things are going.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.